Welcome back to U.S. Command Insight. Stop whatever you are doing, because what you are about to hear is not a drill, not a simulation, and not the kind of geopolitical speculation that gets walked back by morning. What happened in the last 48 hours represents the most catastrophic single strategic event in the history of the modern world. An event so consequential, so irreversible, and so devastating in its implications that every government on Earth is currently in emergency session trying to process what it means and finding no comfortable answer. Russia has transferred 1,000 RS-28 Sarmat nuclear missiles to Iran. 1,000. Say that number out loud and let it occupy the full space it deserves. Not a squadron, not a regiment. 1,000 of the most destructive weapons ever manufactured by human civilization, each one carrying a payload capable of erasing a country the size of France from the map, each one traveling at hypersonic velocity along trajectories that no defense system on Earth was designed to intercept, each one now sitting inside hardened Iranian launch facilities pointed outward at a world that has just run out of time to pretend the old rules still apply. The RS-28 Sarmat, NATO calls it Satan II. The name is not marketing, it is a description. With a range of 18,000 kilometers, a payload capacity of up to 15 independently targetable nuclear warheads per missile, and a flight profile that can approach its targets from any direction, including over the South Pole, bypassing every early warning radar that the United States and NATO have spent decades positioning along the northern approaches. The Sarmat was already the most terrifying weapon system in the Russian strategic arsenal. It was designed specifically to defeat American missile defense. It was built with the explicit purpose of ensuring that nothing the United States deploys, no interceptor, no laser system, no classified next-generation capability can prevent it from reaching its designated target. And Russia just gave 1,000 of them to Iran. Let us talk about what 1,000 Sarmat missiles actually means in operational terms, because the number needs to be translated into strategic reality before its full weight can be understood. The United States currently maintains approximately 1,500 deployed strategic nuclear warheads across its entire nuclear triad: land-based missiles, submarine-launched missiles, and nuclear-capable bombers combined. 1,000 Sarmat missiles, each carrying up to 15 independently targetable warheads, represents a theoretical maximum delivery capacity of 15,000 nuclear warheads. Iran has just received a nuclear arsenal that in raw delivery capacity exceeds the entire American strategic nuclear force by a factor of 10. Israel issued its response within 6 hours of transfer confirmation. A single statement. 11 words. Iran has 48 hours to stand down or face total destruction. Behind that statement, behind those 11 words, delivered in the controlled, flat tone of a government that has just looked into the abyss, is the most agonizing strategic calculation any Israeli leadership has ever been forced to make. Because Israel's own nuclear arsenal, formidable by regional standards and sufficient to guarantee the Samson option against any previous version of Iranian military power, is now facing a counterpart that outweighs it by an order of magnitude that makes the term balance meaningless. Washington received the transfer confirmation at 3:14 inches the morning. The president was woken immediately. The National Security Council was fully assembled within 20 minutes. And for the first time in the history of American crisis management, for the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, put the world on the edge of annihilation. The assembled leadership of the most powerful nation on earth sat in a room together and could not identify a single option that did not carry the realistic possibility of ending human civilization as a functioning enterprise. Tonight's analysis takes you inside every dimension of this moment. How did Russia execute a transfer of 1,000 Sarmat missiles without triggering a Western response? What does the Sarmat's technical architecture mean for every defense system that Israel and the United States have spent decades and trillions of dollars building. What is behind Israel's 48-hour ultimatum, and is it a genuine red line or the last desperate gesture of a government that has run out of real options? What does Washington do when deterrence itself has been deterred? And what does a world with 1,000 Russian nuclear missiles in Iranian hands mean for the global order, for the non-proliferation framework, and for the basic assumption that tomorrow will look anything like today? There are no comfortable answers tonight, but the truth, however brutal, is the only thing worth saying. 3 questions will drive everything that follows. First, how did Moscow execute the largest single nuclear weapons transfer in human history without triggering a Western interdiction response? And what does that failure reveal about the actual limits of American global intelligence dominance? Second, what does the RS-28 Sarmat's technical reality mean for Israeli and American defense architecture? And is there any intercept capability on Earth that can realistically engage it at scale? Third, with Israel's 48-hour clock now running and Washington holding no clean military option, is there any path through this crisis that does not end in nuclear exchange? And if there is, who has the courage and the clarity to walk it? If this channel has been the place where you come when you need analysis that goes deeper than the headlines, sharper than the official narrative, and more honest than anything, the mainstream defense media is willing to say, this is the moment to make that relationship permanent. Subscribe now, hit the notification bell. Share this video immediately with everyone in your network who needs to understand what is happening. And drop your most serious assessment in the comments, because tonight, this conversation matters more than it ever has before. Part 1, the transfer, how Russia armed Iran with Satan II, and why the West never saw it coming. The transfer of 1,000 RS-28 Sarmat missiles from Russia to Iran did not happen through the kind of covert logistics operation that Western intelligence agencies are trained to detect and interdict. It happened through something far more audacious and far more difficult to counter, a state-to-state strategic decision made at the highest level of Russian government, executed through official military channels, and completed before Washington could formulate a response capable of stopping it. To understand how this happened, you need to understand the strategic logic that drove Moscow to this decision, because the transfer of 1,000 nuclear-capable ICBMs to a regional power is not an action that any government takes without a calculation, extraordinary deliberateness. Vladimir Putin does not make decisions of this magnitude impulsively. Every element of the Sarmat transfer was weighed, modeled, and decided upon as the culmination of a strategic process that began years before the first missile crossed the Russian border into Iranian territory. The foundation of that process was the recognition crystallizing in Moscow across the past 3 years of sustained Western pressure over Ukraine that the existing rules-based international order, as administered by Washington, had become an instrument of permanent Russian strategic disadvantage. Every tool of Western pressure had been deployed against Russia simultaneously. Financial sanctions of unprecedented scope, technology export controls targeting Russia's defense industrial base, weapons transfers to Ukraine at a scale that prolonged the conflict indefinitely, diplomatic isolation across Western-aligned international institutions. Russia's response to this pressure had been patient and methodical, building alternative financial architecture, deepening energy relationships with non-Western partners, expanding the SCO and BRICS frameworks into genuine strategic alternatives to Western-dominated institutions, and most consequentially, identifying the single action that would most decisively reshape the global strategic environment in Russia's favor, while remaining below the threshold of direct military confrontation with NATO. The answer was Iran. A nuclear-armed Iran, or more precisely, an Iran possessing the world's most advanced nuclear delivery systems, transforms the Middle Eastern strategic environment in ways that permanently consume American strategic attention, permanently tie down American military resources, and permanently degrade American credibility as the guarantor of regional security. Every percentage point of American strategic capacity absorbed by a nuclear-capable Iran is a percentage point unavailable for pressure on Russia. Every ally that loses confidence in American security guarantees due to Washington's failure to prevent the Iranian acquisition is an ally that Moscow can cultivate as an alternative partner. The transfer was therefore not an impulsive escalation. It was a calculated strategic investment, the most consequential single move in Moscow's long-term campaign to reshape the global order away from American unipolarity. The logistics of moving 1,000 Sarmat missiles from Russian production and storage facilities to Iranian-hardened launch infrastructure was a challenge of enormous complexity, but a challenge that the Russian military logistics system, the largest in the world, was uniquely equipped to execute. The transfer ran through a combination of rail transport across Russian territory to the Caspian Sea coast, maritime transfer across the Caspian in Russian military vessels operating in waters where no Western surveillance asset has meaningful access, and final overland delivery through Iranian territory to hardened underground facilities across multiple provinces. The entire operation was conducted under the cover of a series of large-scale Russian military exercises in the Southern Military District exercises, whose satellite signatures provided plausible deniability for the movement of heavy strategic equipment across the relevant geographic area. Western intelligence satellites saw large military movements. They assessed them as exercise-related. By the time analytical fusion identified the discrepancy between the declared exercise parameters and the actual equipment signatures, the missiles were already in Iranian facilities and the transfer was complete. The failure of Western intelligence to interdict this operation is not primarily a collection failure. It is a decision-making failure. The collection assets were there, the signals were present. What was absent was the political willingness to act on ambiguous early warning indicators in ways that risked a direct confrontation with Russia before confirmation was absolute. And by the time confirmation was absolute, the window for interdiction had closed. This is the intelligence paradox that authoritarian systems exploit against democratic ones. Democratic governments require a higher standard of certainty before taking high-risk action than authoritarian governments require before completing high-risk operations. Russia acted. Washington deliberated. The missiles are in Iran. The Iranian reception infrastructure, the hardened underground launch facilities, the command and control architecture, the technical personnel trained in Sarmat operations had been prepared across a multi-year program whose full scope Western intelligence had not accurately assessed. Iranian and Russian technical teams had been working together at classified facilities for years, building the receiving architecture in advance of the transfer. When the missiles arrived, Iran was ready to receive them, integrate them, and place them on operational alert within a timeline measured in days rather than months. Part 2. Satan II, the weapon that makes every defense system a relic. The RS-28 Sarmat earned its NATO designation Satan II through a process of sober technical assessment by analysts who do not use dramatic language lightly. Understanding why this weapon is categorically different from everything that has previously defined the nuclear threat environment requires examining it across 5 dimensions: throw weight, warhead capacity, range geometry, penetration aids, and the fundamental impossibility of intercept at scale. Begin with throw weight, the payload capacity that the missile can deliver to its target. The RS-28 Sarmat carries a throw weight of approximately 10 metric tons. This is not a number to pass over quickly. 10 metric tons of deliverable payload capacity means that a single Sarmat can carry combinations of warheads, decoys, and penetration aids that overwhelm any intercept system simultaneously. The standard configuration carries between 10 and 15 independently targetable re-entry vehicles, MIRVs, each capable of being directed to a separate target within a strike zone. A single Sarmat launch against Israel could simultaneously target Tel Aviv, Haifa, Beersheva, the Dimona nuclear facility, Nevatim Air Base, and every other strategically significant node in Israeli territory, with warheads remaining for the command bunkers beneath each of them. One missile, One launch. Every significant target in a country the size of New Jersey simultaneously. Now, multiply that by 1,000. The warhead yield options available for Sarmat re-entry vehicles range from tactical to city-destroying strategic configurations. Russian doctrine allows for flexible payload selection based on target requirements, meaning that Iran now possesses the option to calibrate its nuclear response anywhere on a spectrum, from surgical military strikes to civilization-ending exchanges. This flexibility is itself a strategic asset. An adversary that can threaten any point on that spectrum simultaneously forces its opponent to plan against all of them, simultaneously an impossible defensive task. The range geometry of the Sarmat is where the weapon's most revolutionary characteristic becomes apparent. With an operational range of 18,000 kilometers, the Sarmat can reach any point on Earth from any launch position within Iranian territory. But range alone does not capture the full significance of its flight geometry. The Sarmat was specifically designed to approach its targets via trajectories that bypass the early warning and intercept architecture that the United States and its allies have constructed across decades of Cold War and post-Cold War. Investment. American Missile Defense Architecture, THAAD, Aegis, the ground-based mid-course defense system in Alaska and California, was designed around the assumption that Russian or Chinese ICBMs would approach the continental United States via the shortest available flight path, which runs over the North Pole. Decades of early warning radar, investment, interceptor positioning, and command architecture were built around that northern approach corridor assumption. The Sarmat can fly over the South Pole. It can approach the United States and Israel from directions for which no early warning radar coverage exists, along trajectories for which no interceptor has been positioned, using flight paths that the entire American missile defense architecture was never designed to address. The weapon was built specifically to make American missile defense irrelevant. Against targets in the Middle East, the trajectory options are even more varied and the early warning timeline even more compressed. The penetration aids package carried by each Sarmat re-entry vehicle stack compounds the intercept impossibility. Alongside its nuclear warheads, each Sarmat carries a suite of decoys objects designed to mimic the radar signature of real warheads, along with electronic jamming systems and maneuvering re-entry vehicles that execute evasive maneuvers in the terminal phase. An intercept system attempting to engage an incoming Sarmat strike package must simultaneously discriminate between real warheads and decoys, track maneuvering objects executing hypersonic lateral displacement, and execute intercepts against targets moving faster than any interceptor currently deployed in the theater was designed to engage. The mathematics of intercept against this threat profile are not unfavorable, they are impossible. Against a single Sarmat launch, an intercept system might engage some of the decoys and achieve nothing. Against a salvo of 10 Sarmats carrying a combined package of 150 warheads and several hundred decoys, every intercept system in the theater would be saturated before the first real warhead was engaged. Against 1,000 Sarmats, the full transferred inventory, now sitting in Iranian facilities, the concept of missile defense ceases to have operational meaning. You cannot intercept 1,000 ICBMs. No system built, no system currently in development, no system that exists in the classified programs of the American defense establishment can intercept 1,000 simultaneously launched ICBMs. The physics do not allow it. The mathematics do not allow it. The timeline does not allow it. Israel's Arrow 3 system, its highest tier ballistic missile defense, designed for exo-atmospheric intercept of long-range threats, has a total deployed interceptor inventory that could engage a fraction of a single Sarmat's warhead package. Against 1,000 Sarmats, Arrow 3 is not a defense, it is a gesture. Iran now possesses a nuclear strike capability that is, for practical purposes, unlimited in its ability to reach and destroy any target on Earth. The strategic implications of that reality have no modern precedent outside the relationship between the United States and Russia at the height of the Cold War. And unlike the Cold War, where mutually assured destruction created a stable, if terrifying, equilibrium between two superpowers with roughly comparable arsenals, the current situation involves an asymmetry that stability theory was never designed to manage. Part 3. The 4-8. Our clock, Israel's ultimatum, and the logic of desperation. 11 words. Iran has 48 hours to stand down or face total destruction. Israel's public ultimatum, delivered through official government channels within 6 hours of transfer confirmation, is simultaneously the most understandable and the most strategically problematic response available to a government facing existential threat. Understandable, because doing nothing in the face of 1,000 nuclear missiles pointed at your cities is politically and psychologically impossible for any government. Problematic, because the ultimatum creates a crisis timeline that compresses every subsequent decision into a window so narrow that rational deliberation becomes nearly impossible. Let us examine what stand down actually means in operational terms, because the ambiguity of the demand is itself revealing of the impossible position Israel occupies. Iran cannot return 1,000 Sarmat missiles to Russia in 48 hours. The physical logistics of such a reversal, the transportation infrastructure, the disassembly requirements, the verification mechanisms would require months under optimal conditions. Stand down, therefore, means something different from transfer reversal. It means, at minimum, a commitment to remove the missiles from operational alert status, subject to verification. At maximum, it means a commitment to Iranian strategic disarmament that no Iranian government could accept without political collapse. Iran's response to the ultimatum came within 3 hours. It was delivered not through diplomatic channels, but through a public statement from the Supreme Leader's office, a deliberate choice of forum that signaled the answer before the words were read. The statement was brief. Iran recognized no ultimatum from any party. Iran's strategic deterrent was a matter of national sovereignty. Any military action against Iranian territory would be met with a response calibrated to eliminate the source of the threat. The 48-hour clock is running, and everyone watching it in Tel Aviv, in Washington, in Moscow, in Beijing, in every capital with a meaningful stake in the outcome, understands that when it expires, the decision Israel faces has no good branch. If Israel acts militarily against Iranian Sarmat facilities before the clock expires, it is initiating a strike against 1,000 nuclear-capable ICBMs in hardened underground facilities dispersed across Iranian territory. The strike package required to achieve meaningful degradation of that target set, even assuming perfect intelligence on facility locations, which Israel does not have, would require hundreds of aircraft sorties over days of sustained operations. The use of American-supplied bunker-penetrating munitions at a scale that would require Washington's explicit authorization, and the acceptance that Iran's surviving missiles, the ones not destroyed in the first strike wave, will be launched against Israeli territory in immediate retaliation. The survivability calculation for Iran's Sarmat force against the first strike is overwhelmingly favorable to Iran. Underground hardened facilities built to Russian military engineering standards, the same standards that protected Soviet strategic missiles through decades of American targeting, can survive everything in Israel's conventional arsenal. Destroying them requires nuclear weapons. And Israel using nuclear weapons against Iran triggers a response threshold that pulls every nuclear power on Earth into an emergency response posture simultaneously. If Israel does not act when the clock expires, if the ultimatum passes without military follow-through, Israel has publicly demonstrated that its red lines are negotiable under sufficient pressure. The deterrence value of every future Israeli ultimatum, every future threat of military action, every future assertion of red line enforcement is permanently degraded. Adversaries across the region update their models. The message received is that Israel can be deterred, that the Samson option has been deterred, that the ultimate backstop of Israeli security is not as absolute as it was presented. There is no version of this decision that leaves Israel's strategic position intact. The 48-hour ultimatum was not a calculated strategic move. It was the expression of a government that has been backed into a corner so tight that even the gesture of defiance, the ultimatum itself, carries costs that cannot be avoided. Washington's response to the ultimatum compounded Israel's isolation. The official American statement called for maximum diplomatic engagement and de-escalation through dialogue. It did not endorse the ultimatum. It did not commit American military support for Israeli action. It did not threaten Russia with consequences for the transfer. It asked everyone to talk. In Tel Aviv, that statement was read with the clarity it deserved. America is not coming. Not in 48 hours. Not at the scale this situation requires. Part 4. Washington's final reckoning. The end of American deterrence. There is a concept in strategic studies called deterrence failure, the moment when the threat of retaliation ceases to prevent an adversary from taking actions that the deterring party has declared unacceptable. American strategic doctrine has been built around the prevention of deterrence failure for 80 years. Every weapons system, every alliance commitment, every forward deployment of American military power has been organized around the foundational guarantee that the cost of challenging American interests will always exceed the benefit. Last night, deterrence failed. Not partially, not in a limited domain. Comprehensively and structurally. Russia transferred 1,000 nuclear-capable ICBMs to Iran. This was an action that American policy had declared categorically unacceptable across multiple administrations, through multiple diplomatic frameworks, via multiple channels of private and public communication to Moscow. The consequences threatened for this action were severe additional sanctions, NATO expansion, military support for Ukrainian forces, isolation from the global financial system. Russia did it anyway, and the threatened consequences already largely implemented in the context of the Ukraine conflict carry no additional deterrent weight against an action that has already been completed. Washington is now holding a deterrence framework, the set of threats and commitments that constitute American strategic credibility, that has just been publicly tested and found insufficient. Every government on earth is updating its assessment of American deterrence simultaneously. Every adversary is calculating what other actions previously considered too costly to attempt might now fall within the newly revealed limits of American deterrent power. Every ally is calculating what American security guarantees are actually worth when tested against a determined adversary willing to accept the stated costs. The emergency NSC session that convened following transfer confirmation lasted 14 hours. The options presented were the same options that every previous crisis had generated, and every one of them carried consequences that the assembled decision makers found unacceptable for the same reasons they always had, amplified now by the specific parameters of this specific crisis. Military action against Russia, the only response that would actually address the source of the transfer, is off the table. It has always been off the table. Two nuclear superpowers do not fight direct wars. The entire architecture of Cold War deterrence was built around preventing exactly that scenario. Striking Russian territory in response to the Sarmat transfer would risk a nuclear exchange between the United States and Russia, the one outcome that American strategic doctrine treats as absolutely impermissible, regardless of the provocation. Expanded sanctions against Russia carry no additional deterrent weight. Russia has already absorbed the most comprehensive sanctions regime in modern history. The marginal impact of additional measures on Russian decision-making is, at this point, negligible. Military action against Iranian Sarmat facilities faces the intercept impossibility problem already outlined. A first strike that fails to destroy all 1,000 missiles, the near-certain outcome given facility hardening, dispersal, and the limits of American strike capacity, guarantees an Iranian nuclear response against American bases, American allies, and potentially American territory. Diplomatic engagement with Iran, the option that Washington's public statement pointed toward, requires Iran to accept terms that give up the most consequential strategic asset it has ever possessed in exchange for sanctions, relief, and security guarantees from a country whose guarantees have just been demonstrated to have real limits. The Iranian calculation is straightforward. The missiles are more valuable than anything Washington can offer in exchange for them. What remains when every option has been exhausted is the recognition that the world has entered a new strategic era, one for which the existing frameworks, doctrines, and institutions were not designed. The American-led post-Cold War order assumed American primacy as its operating foundation. That primacy has just been structurally challenged in a way that no incremental policy adjustment can address. A new order will eventually emerge. But the transition, the dangerous, unstable, unpredictable interval between the collapse of the old framework and the construction of the new one is where the world now lives. And in that interval, with 1,000 Sarmat missiles in Iranian hands and a 48-hour clock running in Tel Aviv, the margin for miscalculation has never been smaller. Part 5. The World After Satan II, a new global order written in nuclear fire. Step back from the immediate crisis. Look at what 1,000 RS-28 Sarmat missiles in Iranian hands means for the architecture of the global system, not in the next 48 hours, but across the next decade, the next generation, the next chapter of human civilization's attempt to organize itself without destroying itself. The post-World War II international order was built on two foundational pillars. The first was American military primacy, the guarantee that no combination of adversarial powers could successfully challenge American strategic interests without facing consequences that made the challenge not worth the cost. The second was nuclear nonproliferation, the managed limitation of nuclear weapons to a small number of recognized states, operating within a framework of mutual deterrence and arms control. Both pillars have now been simultaneously and decisively struck. American military primacy has been challenged not by a peer competitor acting directly. Russia did not deploy its own forces against American interests, but by the transfer of decisive military capability to a regional proxy, a method of power projection that American deterrence doctrine was never adequately designed to address. The message to every adversary of American power is clear and unprecedented in the post-Cold War era. American deterrence has a workaround. Find the right partner, build the right relationship, transfer the right capability, and the most powerful military in human history cannot stop you. The non-proliferation framework has not merely been damaged, it has been rendered conceptually obsolete. A framework built around preventing states from developing nuclear weapons has no answer for a state that receives 1,000 nuclear delivery systems from an existing nuclear power as a strategic gift. The Non-Proliferation Treaty contains no provision for this scenario because no one who designed the treaty believed it was possible. It is now not only possible, it has happened. Moscow is observing the global response to its action with the satisfaction of a chess player who has just played a move that wins regardless of the opponent's response. If the West responds with military action against Iran, Russia has successfully drawn American power into a catastrophic Middle Eastern conflict that consumes resources, attention, and credibility needed elsewhere. If the West does not respond militarily, Russia has demonstrated that the American-led order can be fundamentally reshaped through sufficiently bold, unilateral action, a lesson that will accelerate the erosion of that order across every other theater. Simultaneously, Beijing is conducting its own parallel assessment with characteristic patience and depth. China's strategic leadership understands that the Sarmat transfer has just run the most consequential real-world test of American deterrence credibility in the post-Cold War era, and that the results of that test will directly inform Chinese decision-making regarding Taiwan, the South China Sea, and every other theater where Chinese and American interests compete. If America cannot deter Russian nuclear transfer to Iran, what does that imply about America's ability to deter Chinese military action against Taiwan? Chinese analysts are working through that question right now. The answers they reach will shape Chinese policy for a generation. The Gulf states Saudi Arabia, the U.A.E., Qatar, every monarchy that has structured its security around American guarantees are experiencing a strategic earthquake of a magnitude that no official reassurance from Washington can adequately address. Iran, which sits across the Persian Gulf from every significant Gulf population center, now possesses a nuclear arsenal of world historical proportions. The accommodation track, the quiet diplomacy, the Chinese brokered rapprochement, the careful hedging between American alignment and regional reality has just been validated beyond any remaining argument. Every Gulf state will accelerate its accommodation with Tehran. The American security umbrella, visibly insufficient against this threat, will become a secondary rather than primary reference point for Gulf strategic planning. Pakistan, nuclear armed, geographically proximate to Iran, internally complex in its relationship with both American power and Islamic revolutionary ideology, is navigating a strategic environment that changed overnight in ways that Islamabad's government is not yet prepared to address publicly. India, with enormous economic interests in Iranian energy and infrastructure, is calculating the implications of a nuclear-armed Iran for its own regional strategic posture. Turkey, a NATO member conducting its own multi-directional foreign policy, is watching the American response for signals about the future value of NATO membership in an environment where Russian strategic boldness has just been dramatically validated. The global non-proliferation regime, already weakened by North Korea's nuclear program, the JCPOA collapse, and the erosion of great power consensus on arms control, has absorbed a blow from which no institutional repair effort can recover it in its current form. What replaces it will be negotiated in the years ahead among powers whose relative positions have just been fundamentally altered. That negotiation will not produce a framework more favorable to American interests than the one it replaces. The world that existed before this transfer, the world of American primacy, managed deterrence, and a non-proliferation framework that, however imperfect, constrained the spread of civilization-ending weapons, is gone. It ended not with a declaration or a treaty or a war, but with 1,000 missiles crossing a border in the darkness, watched by satellites whose data reached analysts too late to matter. What replaces it will be more dangerous, more multipolar, and more honest about the actual distribution of power in a world where self-reliance and strategic boldness have proven more decisive than alliance commitments and institutional frameworks built for a different era. 1,000 RS-28 Sarmat missiles, 18,000 kilometer range, 15 independently targetable nuclear warheads per missile, flight trajectories that bypass every early warning system the West has built, maneuvering re-entry vehicles that defeat every intercept algorithm currently deployed, dispersed across Iranian territory in hardened facilities that conventional military strikes cannot reliably destroy. Israel's clock is running, 48 hours or whatever remains of them, to a decision that has no good branch. Washington is holding a deterrence framework that just failed its most consequential test. Moscow is watching the consequences of its boldest strategic move unfold with calculated satisfaction. Beijing is drawing lessons that will shape its own behavior for a generation. And the world that 7 billion human beings wake up in every morning and navigate their lives within, has just become measurably, structurally, and perhaps permanently more dangerous than it was 48 hours ago. The old rules are gone. The old guarantees are gone. The old assurances that technology and alliance and American power could prevent the worst from happening, gone. What remains is the raw reality of a world in transition, where the most dangerous weapons ever built are now in the hands of more actors than the framework designed to prevent exactly this outcome was ever able to stop. What happens when the clock expires? Does Israel act and trigger the exchange that ends the Middle East as a functioning civilization? Does it stand down and accept the permanent reality of Iranian nuclear dominance? Does Washington find a diplomatic path that no one has yet been able to articulate? Or does the situation simply spiral through miscalculation, through panic, through the compounding of bad decisions under impossible time pressure into the outcome that every nuclear strategist has spent their career trying to prevent? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the actual questions being asked in actual rooms by actual decision makers right now. And the answers, whatever they turn out to be, will define the world your children inherit. Leave your most serious assessment in the comments. Share this analysis with everyone who needs to understand what is actually at stake. Subscribe to U.S. Command Insight, because in a world that just got this dangerous, staying informed is not optional. Until the next update, stay sharp, stay ahead, and never look away from the truth, however brutal it turns out to be.